So, Asha, will we ever get the full truth behind the Epstein files?
Eh, it's complicated. I'm Asha Rengaba. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm the author of the Freedom Academy Substack.
And I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down into a soundbite or a skeet. Well, both of us have been away for a few weeks now. Sorry to our listeners if you missed us. But I think we both had a lot of travel, which we can talk about later. But I will say, even on the other side of the world, something that cut through all the noise in Thailand was, the release of the Epstein files, because I was over there on December 19th, which was the date that the law that was passed that required transparency was mandated to go into effect.
That's right. It went into effect, but of course, you would think, of course, that the United States Department of Justice would be in compliance with the law, and they were not. The records were not all released on the 19th, and in fact, there are millions of pages of records that still have not been released to this day. And it looks like the number of documents and files that are to potentially be released keeps growing from day to day, which is odd. Wouldn't you think, Asha, that they wouldn't know
It
what's
it
out there?
is odd, and can we pause right here for a second just to talk
Sure.
about how odd it is? So, look, I think, and I've been saying this for every time this issue has come up. I mean, this is a quote unquote investigation, which really spans. I number it as four investigations. Really, you have the original Palm Beach investigation that resulted in that sweetheart plea deal. You had an OIG investigation into what happened in Florida. Then you had the investigation that led to the charges against Epstein. Then you had the investigation into Ghislaine Maxwell. There might have been sub investigations also after Epstein killed himself, which I imagine I don't know if that would have been conducted out of the Justice Department. I would think so, but the point is that this is a voluminous record. I don't think it's shocking that it is going into the millions of documents. What I don't understand is that this has been an issue that that the Trump administration campaigned on and came into office gangbusters, that they were going to blow the lid off the Epstein files. And from what I understand, that's the first thing that Patel and Bongino did, and even Pam Bondi. They claimed in the spring or going into the summer that they had looked at everything. And there was nothing, there was no client list. There was no one else to prosecute. But if that's the case, then wouldn't everything be kind of ready to go?
Yeah, it's very odd. I mean, aside from obviously the Attorney General saying she had the file on her desk, the Epstein files on her desk, you also had more recently Susie Wiles, the White House Chief of Staff, stating she had reviewed the Epstein file, and she made all sorts of assertions about what was in there, including about some negative things regarding Trump. And yet, what we're now hearing from the Justice Department in a more formal setting is actually we don't even know whether we have everything. We have it was first 1 million pages. Now it's five.
It's up to like 5 million. And
Yeah.
like the million pages was found in the Southern District of New York, which I would have thought, I mean, that's where two of the people charged were charged out of. And so why would these suddenly be found? I mean, I'm just not really understanding how, and I know that at least from on the FBI side, and you can tell me on the DOJ side, I mean, all of the case files are digitally kept in the FBI system. In other words, I don't, we're we're not talking about, I don't know, back in the mid 2000s. I think even then the digital case file system had been in effect for a while at that point. I mean, we're not talking about going into some Hoover era vault and like pulling out, paper files or something. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's not shocking that they might run across something new, but like 5 million documents feels weird to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I didn't mean to talk over you there. I agree with that. I mean, I think I have worked on cases where there were files that were not entirely electronic, where there were pieces of the file that, whatever, we received hard copies of things. But I've also worked on cases where there was related matters, and in those cases, I generally had those other case files effectively consolidated in, and so I would have thought that the Southern District of New York, for example, if they were the last ones handling this, they'd have everything, and there's some place in the southern, that you could just go and get everything, and you would have everything, and then the question would just be how quickly you could review that. And one would think if there was a deadline that you would have all sorts of personnel, spun up to review all of these documents to comply with this deadline, which was, by the way, enacted in a law that was bipartisan, nearly unanimous, and signed by the president. Right? So,
So,
yeah.
so here's my other question. Back in the summer, there were supposedly thousands of agents reviewing the Epstein files. And I mean, I think at the time it was alleged that they were like scrubbing it, for mentions of Trump. I don't know if that's true or not, but there definitely were agents assigned to going through this. And I think redacting at least victim information. So again, I don't know. It just feels like this, like they started in November after the law was passed. They're like, oh, I guess we're going to have to turn these over. So I just feels like whatever was being reported or whatever was ostensibly being done in the spring and the summer, like, I don't know what that was. And the other problem, Renato, is that to the extent that they now do need hundreds, thousands, I don't know how many people they're going to need to go through all these, they fired everybody. I mean, they fired half the FBI. The other half is like out doing immigration enforcement. The Justice Department is down by, I don't even know. I think some like civil division is down by like 70%. So, they were like desperately trying to get attorneys to come in over the winter holiday to do this, but there's just not enough people at this point.
Yeah, I mean that's a kind of a broader issue right now at the Justice Department. I mean, it's certain components. I've heard 30%, 40%, whatever it might be that they're down. They're down in person power. They don't have the personnel that they need, and then there's all sorts of demands that have been placed on them. Whether it's prosecute migrants, deal with all these lawsuits against sanctuary cities, or this. I will note too that this is a time of year, Asha, when there's use or lose time that you get as federal employees.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, you get 4 or 6 weeks, whatever it was, depending on how long you had served, of time that
because you can
get
only
off.
carry over so much time in the federal government. You accrue, personal days. I think you can always carry over your sick days, but your personal days, you can only carry over so many, and that's the use or lose. And I think it ends at the calendar year.
Right. So I will tell you, part of the reason I take vacations in December is because the federal agencies that I practice against are often off. Everyone's off in December, the DOJ, FBI included. And so I wonder if, but what's interesting here, I think, is that you have to wonder why, and no one thought about this before passing this law. I mean, there could have been actual discussions with Congress at the time. But I think that what happened was there was this sort of half-hearted or ill-fated effort to try to quash the whole thing. Of course, as we recall, this is a discharge position, a bipartisan discharge position, petition, not going through the typical channels because the Speaker of the House was, I'd say, complicit with Trump to try to stop this release entirely. But in the end, when it was clear that this was going to happen, you'd think that they could say, look, can we have some sort of,
Graduated.
graduated time. Yeah,
Yeah.
some sort of rolling deadline to sort of get these out in batches. But no one had that conversation. They just
No, because everything is a clown show. Everything is a clown show with this administration, and this is no exception. I mean, I guess let's. Okay, so can we stipulate that all of this is sketchy? The fact that there's like thousands of or millions of, not even thousands, millions of documents that keep surfacing at this stage.
I actually think we should have a conversation about this because to me, I think one big question here, Asha, is incompetence or malice. Like, which is it for this, or is it both?
Well, for which part? So are you suggesting that they're lying about suddenly finding these documents? Like, in other words, are you saying that this is a calculated effort? I mean, I do think that there is some piecemeal release that is intentional. Is there also this kind of lumbering, haphazard attempt to comply with the law, and then now they're like stumbling across crap that they didn't realize they had?
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Or is that too generous? I know people are going to listen to this and be like, "Asha, get real," But I think it's possible that they just don't know what they're doing.
I'm hearing a lot of. So here's my take, but I've been hearing people talk about potential sinister intent here.
Okay, tell me the
Yeah,
sinister
I guess,
story.
yeah, what I would think the sinister intent being that they need to try to bury certain things and they're taking their time trying to do that. I think from my perspective, if they were really sinister, they would be trying to release as much as possible right on the Christmas holiday, all in one dump. So
Yeah,
that, yeah, because this just drags it on. It's going to be news cycle after news cycle after news cycle.
if they were smart, they would have just dumped this back in like April.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like, and then because the reluctance, the fighting it, is what's kind of given it a lot of power. I do think. Okay, so it's sketchy, possibly, probably malicious, but also tinged with incompetence. Okay, that the documents are not all out in an organized fashion. I do think that there is malice or nefarious intent in terms of how these documents are being redacted. And potentially with what they're putting out. I mean, I definitely don't deny, or I wouldn't put it past them that they're literally withholding things, and not releasing certain things. But then there's other documents where there's just entire pages redacted, and part of the law makes clear that the redactions are only allowed to protect the victims. They're not there to protect people, and this is unusual, right? Because it specifically says you can't redact to protect people from embarrassment or political, whatever consequences and stuff. And normally, in releasing documents, I think we do allow for even those considerations because you don't want people implicated in things that they haven't been charged with. But I think Congress made a considered decision that that's just not going to apply here.
That's right. I mean, this is actually really important. I think people need to think about because I think you can see some of the consequences here, even for the stuff that has been released, Asha, which is typically in criminal cases, if there are charges, what is ultimately made public are only the documents and evidence that is used in trial in evidence that is actually introduced in court in some way, whether it's attached to a filing or a trial as an exhibit or something like that. And there are often redactions that are made that as part of that process, like social security numbers, other things are redacted that are going to be potentially private information. And if there's no criminal charges against the person, then there's no disclosure of anything at all, one way or the other. And the thought being is that everyone's entitled to due process in this country. Everyone's presumed innocent. And if there's no charges, the government can't just dump a bunch of stuff out there that could be used to suggest that someone did something wrong without affording that person the opportunity to test those allegations in court. But here, what we have now is all sorts of stuff going around. There's all sorts of allegations that are being made. There's fingers being pointed at folks, and there's no real opportunity for them to do that. And that is, like you said, a considered decision that Congress made. And those rules that we have otherwise are also based on rules that are adopted in accordance with laws that Congress has passed or statutes that Congress has passed in the first place. This is an exception.
Yeah, it's an exception, and I think it's worth talking about why that exception is warranted here, given the magnitude of this particular, sex trafficking. I mean, is the largest sex trafficking operation I think that has ever been uncovered, right, in the United States. And I think it gets to what the purpose is, and I think that that's also something that we need to keep front and center. And it sounds like, because I know there's been legal commentators who have, suggested that the law was shouldn't have been passed or whatever. But I think once you articulate what the purpose of this is and who it's for, I think that's where the reasoning behind it all becomes clear. My understanding is that this is really for the victims. This is for the victims to have transparency, to have closure, to have, uh, who've been gaslit really for decades at this point, including by the criminal justice system, which hasn't really delivered for them to be able to know everything that was happening behind the scenes. And I'm writing a book now on complicity, right? And I think that, sexual assault operations, sex trafficking, and these kind of wider things, whether it's like Harvey Weinstein or Bill Cosby and Jeff Epstein, the criminal net doesn't typically catch everyone. It's not designed to. It catches the people at the top, but there are tons of people that are complicit in allowing it to happen, right? The people, in Harvey Weinstein, the people who are booking the hotel rooms and delivering the victims to him. Obviously, in Epstein, the people who are recruiting from these massage parlors and all of that. Our criminal justice system isn't really designed. I mean, there's accomplice law, there's co-conspirators, accomplices, but even then, it's only going to get a certain part of the iceberg. It's not going to capture most of it. So what I would say is I think the purpose here is precisely to expose complicitors who would not be and will not be ever brought to justice under the high threshold of our criminal laws. But that this activity was so egregious and harmful that and their participation or their condoning or whatever they were doing enabled it to some degree or another, that, oh, well, I mean, I don't know, like, that's sort of what I see. Like, maybe we need to know that Larry Summers he's a very powerful man. I don't think that he was criminally liable for anything. He was just kind of palling around with him, but I don't know. I feel like it is relevant to whether he should be in a position of authority and power at a place like Harvard if he was consorting with and kind of validating the activities even behind the scenes. That's kind of where I come out on why this is different than the way similar releases have been treated in the past.
It's interesting. I guess I viewed it a little bit differently because I think
Okay.
I agree with you. I agree with what you said about complicity. I agree that in the vast majority of criminal cases, not everyone is charged who potentially committed crimes or is engaged in wrongdoing because our system's set up that way. It's
Yeah.
set up to ensure that there has to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and resources are always an issue in every case. You can't possibly run down everything. And so you always are drawing a circle around a certain group of people and saying, here's the people we're charging. And there's others that might be out there. This is as far as we're going to go. And I think there's often in criminal cases, victims are not vindicated fully. That's the case often in cases is that victims are harmed and nothing that the federal government can do can make them whole. And often they feel like they've been wronged and no one has really fully vindicated their rights. Yet, I think something that sets this apart from other cases, like the ones you mentioned, Weinstein, for example, horrific case, and another one in which there is alleged I would say, distrust with government in terms of a potential, how he was treated by prosecutors for a long period of time. And I think this really goes to mistrust of government and the need for
Mm,
transparency in order to have the trust of our government going forward. Because this is, to me, a case other beyond any other that we've ever had, in which there's claims of widespread corruption and involvement of major political figures on both parties in a way that there has never been before. I mean, there have been times where there's been alleged criminal activity that has implicated a certain select group of people, but the Republicans campaigned on really the Democrats having widespread sex trafficking ties to Epstein. And the real reason to have the Epstein files released from their perspective was, hey, what they were saying that we're going to do this was to uncover all these Democrats who were pedophiles, allegedly, which turned out actually it turned out the president that they were electing was the one who wanted to keep these files secret. And really, he wanted to protect himself and his own friends, allegedly, reportedly, as Marjorie Taylor Greene is reporting herself from her, one-on-one conversations with Trump, in which he's saying, I want to protect my friends, essentially. And that's what this is all about from his perspective. But either way, the Republic has a right to know who in their government is trying to protect people in power, and essentially this is a way to not only open the veil on our government, but to ensure that powerful people like Mr. Summers are not protected by anyone in either party. And I thought this was really an action that the Congress was taking, and that ultimately the president signed it, for even though it's clear he didn't want to and would have had his veto overridden if he didn't. That ultimately, at the end of the day, this was about ensuring that we could have trust in our government.
I think that's a great point. And I think it can be both. I don't think these are mutually exclusive propositions, right? I think that's right. It's to kind of create transparency, which is the pillar of democracy. I think it's about making sure that people who may not be criminally liable, that they're exposed even and face whatever repercussions come their way, precisely because they're not going to get criminal repercussions. But I think that gets to the suggestion that was made by the legal commentator. Who was it? Ankush.
Ankush Hadori, my successor as
Oh,
legal
okay.
columnist.
Yeah, I mean, and
Yes.
I think he made a comment to the effect of, no one else is going to be charged from any of this, so this is all pointless, and basically this has created more trouble than it's worth, more chaos than it's worth, and this law shouldn't have ever been passed. But I think that just misses the point. I think, as I just said, is precisely because it's unlikely that no one else is going to be brought to justice through the formal system that we need to know, and I think it gets to the real intended beneficiaries of this. I think, for first and foremost, maybe it's the public, maybe it's MAGA, who were promised whatever, but I think it should be the victims, and they're the ones who have wanted this to happen.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, Asha. And I think that his comments, what really misses what I think they miss the mark on, is the reason that there's going to be no further prosecutions is because the Trump Justice Department clearly has no interest in pursuing this matter, right?
Yeah.
Unless it involves Democrats, unless there's some partisan political gain. I mean, he made the point himself in that statement that, hey, they've got this investigation against Democrats and that's it. And he didn't think that was going to, he's probably right, that won't turn up anything. He's probably right that the Trump administration isn't going to pursue anything else. That part I do agree with. But it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be that way. And the release of this information could potentially inspire there to be calls for for the public calls for the prosecution of certain individuals, in the same way that Trump did not want to release these files at all, wanted to bury this completely, changed it in about face and said that this was all a quote unquote Democrat hoax, and was forced to release these files anyway, because there was ultimately a very widespread bipartisan agreement that there should be transparency regarding this issue.
Yeah. I think it's also, I mean, I definitely think that Trump is scared of something, and we can talk about that in a second. But I think it's fair to point out also that, I mean, Biden was in office for 4 years, and the off at least the Southern District that had this, and I think there were really reputable prosecutors who had access to clearly at least a good chunk of this stuff, chose not to prosecute. I mean, in other words, I don't know that the decision to not prosecute is only to hide the ball. I think that it may be that there's just not enough there, which kind of gets to some of these memos that have surfaced where there was mention back in 2020 in some of these memos about co-conspirators, and there's been a lot that's been made about who those people were. I'm kind of I need more information on that, because I know even though they're called co-conspirators, and you can tell me if I'm right. I mean, there's co-conspirator in the eyes of the law, but in terms of the way that these operations go down, and particularly the way that Epstein's operation worked, was almost like a Ponzi scheme, which is that they would recruit girls, and they would be abused and trafficked or whatever, and then at some point they were also groomed to go out and recruit more people. And so victims become, I guess, I mean, legally speaking, perhaps technically co-conspirators, right? So I know that, for example, in the Florida case, at least the prosecutor in that case, not Acosta, that actual line prosecutor is handling it, mentioned that in the OIG report, because I read that report pretty carefully. She said that the red flag didn't go up for her when, the co-conspirators were covered under the plea agreement, because she assumed that that meant the people that they had identified, and they had decided that those were also victims and that they wouldn't have charged them anyway. So I'm just throwing that out there for people to think about, because that could be a reason that people who might be designated as co-conspirators were not pursued.
I think I will just say it's a common feature, because I also handle child exploitation and abuse cases myself. It's a common feature of these cases that the perpetrator ultimately um, get, coerces or conscripts victims to aid him in his wrongdoing. I don't want, and I don't think you meant it to compare. Obviously, financial crime and the harm that's in a financial crime like a Ponzi scheme is so distinct from this. I mean, it's so horrific.
No, but I'm talking about bringing in the new people. Right. Kind of like if that's the empire, the enterprise kept growing because it was growing exponentially, because each layer that was brought in was then kind of used as a source to bring in more. From what I understand.
I think I hear you, and I think, yeah, I agree. I hear what you're saying on that. I mean, I think from my perspective, part of the reason that there may be people out there who aren't charged as well could be witness issues. Like, in other words, there are victims who may just not want to testify. And I mean, it was often the case that victims were just like, I don't want to have anything to do with this. I want to put this behind me. Understandably, these are horrific things. You also have times where there's just proof issues as well. Like, it could be different as to a certain person. So there could be all sorts of reasons why a case may not get brought. And I think the passage of time can impact that as well. I mean, it could be that, what you might have been able to do back when the Palm Beach investigation first was going on is something you can't do decades later, unfortunately.
So
right?
What do you think about the mentioning of those 10 co-conspirators or whatever? I mean, one of them was identified as a victim who was then conscripted.
Yeah, I guess my perspective is that a person who is victimized should not be mentioned. And that's part of the things that I think is challenging about the way this is being done. I think you could have I think that's someone who's victimized. I think they have a good argument that, but it really comes down to the facts and circumstances, I would say, of it, in terms of their activity. It's very challenging. I think it's a very difficult one, right? Where you have somebody who's victimized. And I think it's partly because I'm not. My argument would be if I was advocating a victim advocate on behalf of that person who's victimized, would be that that person could form the mental state to truly conspire criminally.
Yeah. Yeah. They're being coerced, then it's not a true voluntary. So I guess then this brings us to the not the last question, but I think the a main question, which is to the extent that this is being done piecemeal and there is documents are being deliberately withheld or slow rolled or overly redacted or whatever
Right.
doctored. I mean, I don't know if that's happened yet, but what the consequences are. And so this is where we find ourselves once again in the position where the branch that is responsible for enforcing the laws is the one that's engaging in the wrongdoing, which creates a lot of problems. And one of the things that's been floated by Representatives Khanna and Massey is potentially holding Pam Bondi, is using the inherent contempt power, holding her in contempt of Congress, but using the inherent contempt power, which is different than the criminal contempt power that Congress has. And I feel like we should kind of unpack that and why that would be the mechanism that they would use.
Well, I don't even know how. Well, a couple thoughts on this. I mean, they have also thrown out. I will just note, and that this is obstruction of justice and could be prosecuted in a subsequent administration as well. I think that is more fanciful than real, and I think that's why they're very focused on inherent contempt. When it comes to criminal contempt, the reason they can't really rely on that is because ultimately they're not the executive branch, and they realistically can't count on the executive branch to enforce anything that they do whatsoever. The reason they're relying on inherent contempt is because that's something that Congress can do on its own, and theoretically they can have somebody try to keep Pam Bondi somewhere or punish her in some way. But I think as a practical matter, Asha, I don't think that that's a realistic outcome either. Do you?
No. So inherent contempt. So Congress hasn't used it since 1935, but I think it's worth just talking about this idea of inherent powers because we hear a lot about inherent authority in the context of Article 1, right? Because the president will always invoke, and not just Trump, but presidents of both parties, and we'll talk about this in segment 2, inherent war powers. And what they're trying to say is it's actually not spelled out in black and white in the Constitution, but if you read between the lines, it's there. And that's really where the idea of inherent contempt comes from, which is, and it comes from Supreme Court decisions, which have basically said that Congress has the power to enforce compliance with its subpoenas to obtain information in aid of its legislative function. So, in other words, it has the inherent power to ensure that people are complying with what it's doing. Now, I think where you're getting to the distinction with the problem with criminal contempt is the how do you enforce it?
Right.
And the problem with criminal contempt, as Renato just mentioned, is that you have to use the Justice Department. And we saw this before with, Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro. These are people that during the January 6th hearings were held in contempt and were prosecuted and then later pardoned. I believe that with inherent contempt, there used to be a room in Congress, and I think the sort of sergeant at arms could go arrest the person and go stick them in this congressional jail or something. Obviously, that doesn't exist anymore, but they can impose a fine, and that fine could be enforceable civilly, so they don't have to rely on the Justice Department. So I think Pam Bondi could be fined $5,000 a day or something like that. It's nothing. I mean, here's the thing. We're not in the best place right now for our democracy. We're not in a place where all of our branches are firing at their full power. And so before people poo-poo using something that doesn't feel totally adequate, because it's not, I also would say we should use what there is because we still have it.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I mean, I hear you on that. I think Yeah, just to make this like just to play this out a little bit, the criminal side, the taking the United States Attorney General and trying to have the United States Justice Department prosecutor or hand do anything related to her is absurd, right? Obviously,
Right.
the 1519 very difficult, I think, for them to try to make a charge that she's engaged in, she's altered or concealed documents in relation to a proceeding. So I don't think they're going to do that. So yeah, I mean, could they try to have a fine? Yes. Will they have the votes for it to override a veto on that? I don't know, but I would say it would hold people accountable. I mean, it would certainly get
What
the
do you mean
folks
override a veto?
because they would
That's
need.
just
I'm sorry.
no. Go ahead.
They would need to get a majority on that, right?
They would need to get a majority. I thought you meant that it would have to somehow be approved by. Um, yeah, it just needs a majority of representatives to vote for it. They don't. The House wouldn't even need the Senate's approval.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so they could do it on their own.
Hmm.
And then if you had that, by the way, I'll just add the second part of this, is I think it would bolster the case for potential impeachment.
Over the Epstein files, that'd be very yeah.
Not of Trump, of Bondi.
Yeah, they've mentioned that as well. It's interesting. I definitely think it's one thing that I think that Massey and Kana have kind of stumbled onto is they have an issue that there's wide bipartisan support. No one realistically is going to say, "No, I want to keep these hidden." I mean, Trump, but other than Trump, no one's willing to back him on that. What was in the vote, like 433-2 or something absurd?
Yeah.
So it's going to be very challenging for people to say we don't want to punish her for not having the files released. And so it is a way of maintaining some leverage. I mean, they have, when, for example, you mentioned earlier a document that was almost completely redacted.
Mm-hmm.
They put pressure and they use some of these words, like, inherent
contempt and impeachment.
And suddenly the doc got released, right? I mean, they are getting some results with this. I will note too that there are documents being released that the Justice Department doesn't like. And you know this because the Justice Department's own Twitter account is tweeting out
Oh my
their
God,
own
totally. They're like,
for Trump.
don't come to conclusions just from looking at this picture. It's so Mickey Mouse. It's like, I can't believe that it's like the Justice Department, but I think there's reporting that the accounts were handed over to the White House. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but it was just so crazy that the Justice Department accounts are being.
Yeah, no.
Go ahead.
There's a reason why I mentioned it. So, no, it's okay. The Justice Department is supposed to be representing the United States and its people, not representing a particular person. And here it is, acting effectively like a personal attorney for the president. I mean, what you would expect ordinarily is for the president to retain a personal attorney, that personal attorney to separately say, "Hey, I know his name appears here, but look at this and look at that," and so on. You can put some context. But no, you literally have the Justice Department making official statements regarding this, which I think is rather remarkable. I mean, I find this to be a circumstance in which the administration looks completely flummoxed, completely on its heels, completely disorganized, completely incompetent. And other people are saying that I hear a lot of people saying that there's something more at work here, but right now they seem to be doing a great job of shooting themselves in the foot over and over and over again.
Totally. It's funny. I just finished watching the Watergate documentary, Watergate, A Blueprint for a Scandal. I was in it actually, but I was actually watching it because, I'm doing my research on complicity, and it's interesting because I think there are some parallels with this, which is, the more you're trying to cover it up, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
It was completely, I mean, it was the crime too. I mean, that was pretty bad in Watergate, but the cover up was really effed up. And so, it kind of, I think is very similar, is that they're really digging themselves into a hole. And I think I think the lesson of Watergate, and certainly the lesson of the digital age, is nothing ever gets destroyed. And I mean, people are already like realizing that even the redactions have been hastily done, and you can actually, unfortunately, I think for the victims, you can actually unredact them in some way because they're not done properly.
Yeah,
But
I'm
go
PDF.
ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say PDFs. You have to use a very special redaction tool, or else you can just literally copy and paste the redacted. If you just put a black line over it, you can copy and paste. And literally, the difference here, Asha, was that someone canceled the subscription for
Oh my
Adobe
God.
Acrobat Pro from the Justice Department to save. I would think it was a Doge. At least that's what reported. I had seen reported was that Doge had canceled that to save money, and as a result, they couldn't do the redactions properly. And there you go.
Well, the truth is going to come out one way or the other,
And that is
and
a good thing. Yes.
perhaps it will set this administration free. Speaking of the truth, Renato, you can't handle the truth.
Well, Trump reveals the truth without even meaning to. I mean, we just keeping that. He's like in many ways, just letting him talk is the best way to find out exactly what's going on in his own administration.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about I'm bringing in the Few Good Men reference because we're talking about the military strikes
Right. Well, and
in Venezuela.
those are revealed by him, right?
Yeah, so he revealed a covert operation by the CIA, which makes it not so covert anymore.
Which is really really remarkable. Really remarkable, I think.
So let's do a quick recap. Um, Basically, and there was a really bonkers report in the New York Times that kind of chronicles how this entire whatever we're doing, this military buildup slash attack invasion came to be. And it's a number of different forces that are in the White House with a number of different agendas. And I think we can unpack the motives there. But what we have so far in terms of actual military operations is, as we've talked about before on this podcast, a number of strikes on boats in the Caribbean, none of which, from nothing that I've seen and from what we can see with our naked eye, passes any kind of legal smell test when it comes to these being legitimate military targets, that these being legal under international law, these being legal even under our domestic constitutional law. We've also had the issue of survivors being killed, which gets into either outright murder or war crime territory, and we've talked about that. But what we recently had is the first strike on Venezuelan soil, which was a CIA drone strike on, I think, boats or some portion of a dock in Venezuela. No civilians were there, but as you mentioned, Trump just blurted it out. And this was supposedly a CIA covert operation. He had authorized covert operations a long time ago. Again, I just feel like I need to emphasize that normally we don't know when covert operations are authorized because they are supposed to be covert. And the point of covert operations is that the U.S. has plausible deniability and can deny that it had anything to do with it, which of course no longer is possible since Trump has taken full credit.
Yeah, I thought the point of covert operations was to reveal them on radio interviews. So that was that's what I thought the point was. But yeah, that's what I was getting. That's what I was getting at in the beginning. Is like it's so odd that the president of the United States is doing this. I think it's also odd this sort of undeclared war, effectively, not just on drug traffickers, but on Venezuela. I mean, it's apparent that Trump is not really. If Trump was decided, well, drug trafficking is not a crime; it's an act of war, which we've already discussed how problematic that is. But even if he really was focused on drugs, most of the drugs in the United States come through Mexico. They don't come through Venezuela. And it's very odd that he's so focused on Venezuela and only Venezuela. And I think it really calls into question what the motives are here.
Yeah, and I think there are a number of different motives. One thing I'll just say, just to get back to that inherent piece, the I mentioned before that the president has inherent war powers, right? But those are usually interpreted to be war powers that exist in a defensive capacity. That, for example, if the U.S. is under imminent threat, um, the president has inherent power to repel that attack or whatever. And there's no, I think they're trying to make, there have been intimations that they're trying to claim that these the drug trafficking is an imminent threat or whatever, and they're trying to they're trying to create all this war language around it. But I think, Renato, I just want to point out that the fact that Trump is mentioning the covert action, obviously the purpose of it is not to keep it covert, right? Like this is not something secret to do that, we can just, or like, hey, it wasn't us. I think that the purpose of using the CIA is to basically do an end run around the War Powers Resolution. Because the War Powers Resolution would require Congress's involvement, right? If he introduces armed forces into hostilities, then he's on a 60-day clock unless Congress approves. And I know like this administration doesn't care a lot about the law, but I think we've seen in a lot of different contexts that it tries to at least, do kind of a kabuki dance with the law, like they're doing with the Epstein files. So they probably just don't want to bother with that. So I think that that's one thing, is that they're just trying to end run Congress altogether. But I think it gets to, again, what you said with the motive. And that New York Times piece was really interesting because it sounds like Trump is really interested in Venezuelan oil.
Right. And that's exactly what I thought this was about from the beginning. And he's mentioned oil.
He mentioned, yeah, he keeps mentioning the oil. He wants to now they're going to try to seize an oil tanker. I don't know what he thinks. Like, does he think that he's going to take possession of the oil? Like, I don't know what he thinks. But there's also this whole constituency, this Cuban American constituency that Marco Rubio is kind of channeling, that want to see regime change with Maduro. So I think that is one of the motives that are there. And then Rubio has teamed up with Stephen Miller. And this is, I think, important because I skated about this a month ago. For Miller, they've been trying to use the Alien Enemies Act to round up immigrants and deport them. They've been doing it by claiming that Tren de Aragua, we're at war with Tren de Aragua or something like that. And the courts have not been, they haven't been buying that. It doesn't really fit the statute because you need a state actor to kind of trigger the Alien Enemy Act. The last time we used it was in World War II. In World War II, we rounded up people of German and Italian and Japanese descent and sent them back because they were enemies of the United States by virtue of their nationality, because these countries were at war with each other. And Miller has been very explicit that if we, quote unquote, go to war with Venezuela, there is a much cleaner basis on which to invoke the Alien Enemies Act. Because then you can say we're at war with Venezuela, so anyone who is a Venezuelan national can be deported. And then I think, suddenly Miller's going to find a lot of quote unquote Venezuelans.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that would be, I would say, a level of strategery that I could see from Stephen Miller. It's not necessarily what I would, emblematic of Trump. I mean, Trump, I was thinking with oil, because he obviously keeps talking about the oil. Yeah, and he thinks of it as himself. Like, he's like, we're getting these rare minerals from Ukraine, or, he's
No,
thinking
he thinks
of
it's
it
going
like
to be
he gets
his.
it personally.
100%.
Yeah,
No, he thinks like the oil is going to be in like his
yeah.
backyard, just like, and he's going to get like his ballroom and his, just like the treasury is his personal piggy bank. So I think there's like three prongs going on here. So Miller wants
Like all at the
to do
same time.
what's that all at the same time. So Miller wants to do this because
Yeah.
it gives him a legal hook for his domestic immigration agenda, deportation agenda. Rubio wants it because I guess the Cuban Americans hate Maduro and want him gone, and this is his chance to, get revenge on Maduro. I did not know that this was like a big thing in the Cuban American community, but that's that. And then Grandpa gets on board. They get Grandpa on board by saying, "You get the oil."
You know what
And
reminds
he
me
goes along.
of
I mean, because it's not
Asha?
that hard. I mean, he's like oil, yeah. He sees dollar signs.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Iraq. And because we were both alive during that period of time in the 2000s, when out of nowhere suddenly all these people on political talk show programs were like Iraq, Iraq, Iraq. Like suddenly there was some
Yeah, yeah.
need for us to go to war with Iraq, and it was sort of came out of nowhere. Like I at the
And it
time it
had
was like
nothing
really
to
out of left
do
field, like
with 9/11 or
with anything.
anything. With
No, it was years
anything.
later at
No.
that point. Yeah, it wasn't,
But
or it was
wasn't
many,
it
many
that
months
Bush had
later.
like a personal vendetta against Saddam Hussein for trying to plot to assassinate his dad?
I mean, there was all these. It was that's what made me think of what you said here is that there's all. I feel like there's all these different
There are all
motives,
these
and
like
everyone had
weird
their own.
motivations. Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
weren't there these neocons who thought we were going to like create democracy in the Middle East, and there's all these different
Yeah.
people had all their own ideas for why conquering this random country and going to war was going to somehow benefit everybody in some way and make everyone in that administration happy. And the only people who did make happy were the Iraqis getting bombed and all these people who were and Americans who were dying as well, and the taxpayers who are footing the bill. So here, I just, I think Trump thinks he's going to like shake down the Venezuelans for their oil.
I
But there
think
are
that's
some
right.
people in his administration who actually want this to be a real war.
Yeah. Yeah. So what that means is that this is basically going to become a shit show. Um, and by the way, the
Yeah,
New York Times
it already
reporting,
is.
and we'll put in a gift link. What's that? It already is. But just to make, put a finer point on it and why the Trump administration's or the Bush administration's invasion of Iraq is like, military genius compared to what's happening now is that all of these things from the Office of Legal Counsel memo justifying these strikes to the military plan to even the execute orders for the military have basically been done only by the insiders in the Trump administration. They have actually cut out the experienced military people, the experienced legal people. This is why they had no plan on what to do with the survivors, because they basically cut and pasted the drone strike language from for the orders for drone strikes from for Al Qaeda, which are happening in a desert, and tried to cut and paste it onto a maritime situation. But maritime situations have other contingencies that you have to plan for. So they had no plan. They had no, they didn't even think about, oh, there could be survivors if you, blow up something in the sea. So they've cut out people from the National Security Council. So there's no experienced people, drafting any of this, thinking through any of this. So it is sort of like Iraq, but it's going to be worse.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, and I only hope for the people of the United States and the people of Venezuela that we end up not having a war here, because I don't really
Yeah.
think that's in anyone's interest other than perhaps Donald Trump's.
So before we go, I wanted to ask you, Renato, how often do you use Chat GPT or some sort of AI? resource?
I use Gemini all the time, like very
Okay.
regularly, on almost a daily basis.
Yeah. Interesting. Like for what?
So for a lot of different things, one thing is there's often things I'm trying to learn about. Like right now, there's a lot of there's I've been shifting a lot of things in my law practice. So I'll be like, hey, I want to read about the statute. I want to understand it. I'll have it go through section by section, summarizing a statute, and then I will go to the statute myself, and it makes it much easier to go back and forth. Sometimes when there's bills passed in Congress, like I'll say, hey, look at this bill that just came out of a particular committee, and I will have it summarize that. It's helped me with all sorts of stuff with like, hey, I want to get something for my home, or I want to fix this problem. I actually use it to write. I used AI to write a song for my wife, just for fun. Like, I mean, I have photos of me. We have photos of my dog as a super dog. We do all sorts of fun stuff with it. I enjoy using large language models. I think it's a lot of fun.
Okay. And you use Gemini. Okay.
Hmm. What
Yeah.
about
So,
you?
I mean, I've dabbled with ChatGPT for just, kind of small things like, minor research points or whatever. But in the last week, I was dealing with like a personal dilemma and like couldn't kind of figure out how to think about it, how to, it was bothering me. And I'd already like talked everybody's ear off, all my friends, and I didn't want to bother anybody. So I was like, well, I'm going to see what ChatGPT has to say about this. And ChatGPT was very wise. ChatGPT
Oh, no
reframed.
kidding.
And yeah, and like kind of, I don't know, like it was, I was like, oh, so this is why people get hooked. Like ChatGPT understood me.
Wow. That's a little scary because you've seen the stuff about people who have actually
Yeah,
been put in weird direct. I mean, they've gone in like suicidal directions or other things or they have a relationship. I mean, I don't know if you read that story in the New York Times about the woman whose boyfriend
yes,
was
somebody
Chat
got
GPT. I
married.
mean, that was a little scary.
So, I mean, I'm not going to marry ChatGPT or anything, but I will say it was very useful and I think gave me some clarity on my issue. And I can totally see that's the phenomenon that you were describing. It's exactly what came to mind. I was like, I could see if you're lonely and you actually don't have a lot of other social interaction, that could be very like there is a kind of pull, to that, to have like this companion or whatever that kind of gets you and kind of makes sense of your problems or whatever. So, so yeah, and then since and I've also been using it to like develop like a writing schedule um and things like that. So it's been useful.
I find it large language models to be super useful, and I use them in the ways that I said. I've always viewed it, and I use it more as like a tool or a helper to accomplish certain discrete tasks, like analyze all of this, summarize all of that. And I think it's extremely good at doing that. I've noticed when I try to have it do more complicated things, there's more errors and more problems that come with that. I've never done the like more personal chat though. And I think I will say that I do think each model is like a little bit different. And Gemini, though, I've noticed that the way Gemini answers things is more like tool-y versus like I think ChatGPT is more personal and it comes
Mm-hmm.
off more that way versus like Gemini seems more like the paperclip, that Microsoft paperclip that you used to, that there used to be like the little cartoon paperclip that was like, "Hey, I'll help you, Clippy." It's like, "Hey, I'm going to help you figure out where your menus are in Microsoft Word." It's more like that versus like something that you could think of as like like a human companion.
Yeah, ChatGPT definitely has more of that human quality and also more of like a coach, like like you know when I had it create this writing schedule for me, at the end it's like don't worry, you got this. It's like it always ends with like this little cheerleading, like rah rah, like you go girl kind of thing. So you're like, oh, I like that. So anyway,
Yeah, that's interesting, and candidly, I think it's really cool that no one has to do anything completely by themselves. They always can have an assistant of sorts to help them. And I think in many ways, although people are focusing on job loss, I think it's a serious issue that needs to be considered. It to me, in many ways, it can be democratizing in a certain way and actually help people who don't have resources, people who don't have, whether they don't have lawyers, they don't have personal, not rich people could always afford personal assistance, but you may not have been able to have somebody helping you with your writing. And I think it's kind of cool that now you can.
and to be clear, I am not having ChatGPT help with the actual writing. It's a writing schedule.
Fair enough. And ChatGPT is not going to marry you anytime soon.
No, I'm still single.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.